So I want to use this opportunity because you've been a brilliant columnist in the Financial Post, Matt, in my opinion, on many topics. And I want to go through these fairly quickly in terms of getting your help and analysis about policies that don't make really any sense by government that are really not helping this productivity picture, let alone our standard of living. And one of them I think you've written about extensively is this whole federal daycare program initiative. It seems like it's been a train wreck. Can you help us understand what the issue is and what's gone wrong and how we deal with this?
Yeah, so the federal government put in this $10 a day national daycare program. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that it's implemented is they're to have separate deals with each province. Um, so, a lot of the times when we hear stories about inaccessible childcare in the media or long wait lists, um, you know, whether it's BC or Alberta, Ontario, there's been lots of stories about just parents who cannot find childcare or who are on multiple wait lists or who've been
Mm-hmm.
waiting for 3 or 4 years or even longer for childcare space. And sometimes you'll hear in the media, the federal government will be saying, well, such and such province did a poor job of implementing the program. It was a great program and it's just, the province screwed it up. Well, the numbers are pretty dismal in just about every province. So that kind of leads you to think there's probably problems, with local implementation, but the real overarching problem is this federal program. And basically, the problem with the federal program is they've tried to design a one size fits all childcare scheme, where it's all day daycare in a regulated center. And if you're a parent who doesn't want that, you want, for example, to take care of your kids at home, well, there's no help for that. You want, maybe you're not working regular 9 to 5 hours, you have an odd job. Well, this daycare program won't suit you either. Um, it's just a mess everywhere. Whether you look at the daycare providers or the families who can't get care, or the taxpayers who are paying through the nose. So
No, I think that's a fair analysis, and this is an important issue as it relates to the care of our children. So tell me this, Matt. Why wouldn't the government just simply give the money to the parents and they decide, and they can decide what's best for their children? They're the experts, not this centralized government in Ottawa. Isn't that the insanity of all this?
yeah, I mean that was basically what Canadians voted for, and that the Harper government did back in 2006.
Indeed,
And
yes.
actually, when the Liberals came to office in 2015, they did do their own version of this universal child care benefit, where they just gave money to parents. Why you would try to solve this problem of affordability by having, again, the government just take control of an entire sector? That makes no sense at all. But that's essentially what the government has done, and we see the chaos and the problems that are being caused coast to coast as a result of that.
But I think you brilliantly summarize it up, Matt. This is a bonkers policy, and it seems like this is the pattern, though, that these governments they tend to emulate, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, but they're undertaking this same type of insane cookie cutter approach, whether it relates to daycare or healthcare, where we have Soviet style medicine. And then you also have, what is it again? Oh, yeah, education, where you have real concerns about education. Why wouldn't you just give the money to the consumer, the patient, whatever you want to call it, the parent, and they make the decision about what's best for them?
That would be the sensible way to do it. Unfortunately, the way that policy is designed is not very sensible.
Well, I think we're onto something, and these are issues that are being done in other countries. In the sense that, well, let's take Sweden as an example, where you have in their education system a choice for parents. They choose where they send their children, what school they want to send it to, and I believe that's the case in healthcare. So maybe we could learn from other countries. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, well, when you do compare Canada against other countries, Let's take healthcare as an example, right? Compared to other developed countries with universal healthcare systems, and there's been research done on this, we generally pay more and get less in terms of, physicians per capita, hospital beds, wait lists. We're generally getting less compared to other universal healthcare countries. And one of the big differences is in other countries, there's at least more private involvement. There's still very heavy government control, but they allow for example, private insurance. Whereas
Yeah.
in Canada, we cannot have private insurance for uh, a lot of procedures that are publicly covered, right? Let's take schools as another example. Where we do see some higher degree of school choice in Canada is in provinces like Alberta and BC, allows them to choose schools that are of better quality, or even if they're not better quality, maybe they're just different. The learning styles are different. The way the school is set up is different. There's maybe focus on sports or focus on music or, something that's better tailored to the child. And we see, in jurisdictions where there is more school choice, and there have been lots of studies done on this, including in the US where there's a lot more, states with school choice programs. We see that families really benefit from having more alternatives available. But even public schools, government-run schools, tend to improve in quality where there's more choice because then there's more competition. They have to perform better in order to have parents continue to choose to send their kids to the government-run schools.
I,
There's a
I
question
think you're right
about,
on.
yeah, Milton Friedman had a famous saying where, you know, the assumption for having more choice in education, you don't have to assume that private schools are better than public schools. You just have to assume that competition is better than monopoly. When you give
I like
people
that a
more
lot.
choice, you'll have better outcomes.
The freedom to choose, as the great Milton Friedman talked about in his book called Free to Choose. I
Yeah.
like the way you think, Matt. Why don't we empower people with choice? And certainly that's a key theme in public policy at the Frontier Center, as you know. So, speaking of taxes and decisions, we know that this April 1st, on April Fool's Day, we had the imposition of yet another round of carbon taxes on the consumer. Are carbon taxes a good idea?
Well, it depends because a carbon tax can be a good idea if it is properly designed and properly implemented. So, economists have generally prescribed very, uh, very specific criteria for how a carbon tax should be implemented. First is if let's say there is an environmental cost of carbon emissions. Now we want the person who is, causing these emissions to account for the fact that they're creating this cost when they emit this carbon or when they make consumption decisions that are harmful to the environment, right? So that's really the underlying logic of the tax. If, for example, a ton of carbon emissions causes, let's say, $20 worth of environmental damage, it could make sense to have a $20 carbon tax. The tax only makes sense if you have it as a standalone policy. Once you start playing the subsidy game and the regulation game, you've destroyed the underlying logic of the tax. And that's exactly what the government has done um, with the electric vehicle mandates, the electric vehicle subsidies. In fact, Chrystia Freeland, I believe, was it Chrystia Freeland or was it Trudeau? I don't remember who, but the government had recently put out an announcement where they had estimated the amount that they have committed to, climate change and the climate transition and green energy and all that since they came into office in 2015 is about $160 billion. Now, when you have a tax that is supposed to, incorporate the costs of carbon emissions into consumption and production activities, you can't then undermine the tax with $160 billion worth of spending. It suggests that To me, it's like having, you know, you have this environmental problem and you have different medicines to solve it. But a lot of medicines, you really should only take one of them at a time. And then when you start mixing them, you start having a bad reaction. And I think that's what we see in the economy right now. We're putting subsidies on top of regulations on top of a tax, and the economy is having a very bad reaction, right? Pick one.
It sounds like the carbon tax, from your perspective, is really almost falling under its own weight of problems and contradictions. It's too darn complex, and I think Canadians sense this, and I think that poll after poll shows that most Canadians see the carbon tax as a bad idea. That it's really just a tax grab. It goes into general revenues. So as we kind of get to the close of our far-reaching conversation, I want to talk a little bit about policy solutions and what citizens can do. So what can governments do if you had to give strategic advice to, say, the next governments, provincially or federally? What are the obvious things that we should be undertaking as a country to ensure that we actually rebuild our country?
Yeah, I mean, so reducing government spending is always at the top of the list. Um, I always like quoting Milton Friedman. So another one is nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as spends his own. We've got
Indeed.
an economy of increasingly of politicians spending other people's money, and that means a lot of money and a lot of resources are going to waste. They're not going to productive use. They're not going to things that will improve our standards of living. So that's one thing, is just cutting government spending. Secondly, is just to reduce a lot of regulation. There's lots of economic activity that can take place, but that just isn't because the government, for whatever reason, disallows it. So, for example, whether it's barriers to trade or even something like the minimum wage law, right?
Indeed.
Let's say there's
Yes.
a high school student, doesn't have much job experience, isn't going to provide much value to an employer, but still wants to work. Now, the employer is not going to be able to pay him very high wage because he's not worth very much. Now, the government has come along and say this economic transaction, which creates value for both sides, is not allowed because of, you're not paying a minimum wage. It's the same thing with rent control, right? Let's say I want to rent an apartment and somebody wants to rent it to me, or somebody wants to build an apartment so that they can, rent out the units to people like me. And the government says, well, stepped in and determined the terms of that transaction through rent control. Well, that's going to kill the economic transaction, even though there's benefits for both sides, right? So there's just a lot of economic activity that doesn't take place because of regulation.
Right on.
So cutting taxes and cutting regulation, those are the two, surefire ways to get the economy moving again and get people investing in the economy.
Well, I like the way you think, Matt Lau. Your analysis has been very helpful, and it certainly encourages each and every one of us as citizens to realize what's going on about the not only the importance of our economy but to our quality of life. So, thank you for joining us today for this far-reaching conversation, Matt.
Thank you.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.